cycling website, which is safecycling.org.au. Very easy. Go spend some time there. There are fantastic resources, and enjoy this course.
Thank you so much, Jen. And of course, thank you to the Amy Gillett Foundation for facilitating this opportunity, and for the federal government for providing the overarching grants to help subsidise this training course and get everyone involved in today's training. So we're certainly thrilled to have you all on board, and we love running this course, and we do like to get a lot of engagement. So we've got a few strategies up our sleeves to make sure that we're getting everyone focused on the content for today and able to chip in with their own ideas and experiences. So although we don't have that face-to-face function, and we don't have the ability to see and listen to everyone, we've still got some avenues for you to be able to contribute and share your own ideas. So by all means, keep that in mind. I'm going to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians, the lands on which I'm gathered on today, which is Badurong country. So I live down in Frankston, and I'd like to pay my respect to traditional owners, custodians, those past, present, and leaders that are emerging, and pay my respect to any of those people, First Nations people, joining us in today's webinar. And of course, we are on varied lands. We are kind of across Australia within this course. So I would like to extend that respect and acknowledgement more broadly across Australia. And just on that note of being such a broad, diverse geographic area in which we're covering, the content that we're going to be going through is very much reflecting different jurisdictions. So we haven't just presented information as it relates to South Australia or New South Wales or any specific jurisdiction. We've reviewed guidelines as well as Australian supplement information, and we're presenting that as what would be considered best practice. So if there's things that you see that look slightly different to the way that bike lanes look in your state or territory, that's okay. Just take away the principles from the discussion, because the way that those principles are applied are a little bit different depending on which part of the country you're from, which is a little bit annoying. You'd like to think that we'd have a nice harmonized approach, but unfortunately we have a little bit of diversity in the way that we apply our cycling standards across Australia. Okay, I'll start by sharing my screen and just go through a little bit of administration just to make sure everyone's comfortable with how these modules are going to run and also what to expect out of the course. So I'll get stuck straight into it. The first thing is we record all of our sessions. So if you do need to drop out of this webinar session, you've got to go pick up the kids or something urgent comes up at work, just rest assured that you won't be marked down for having to leave this presentation. We will post a link to a YouTube site which will allow you to watch the remainder of the session, anything that you missed out on, or rewatch anything that wasn't quite clear to you. So just rest assured that you do have access to this if you do happen to have to step away. But of course, we do encourage you attending live, just so you're able to engage with participants and of course engage with us as well and answer some of our questions. I'll hand over to our wonderful program moderator, Marissa, who'll give us a little spiel on how all things work within Zoom webinar.
Yes, thanks, Max, and hello, everyone. My name is Marissa Garisto, and I am a training coordinator here at Safe Systems Solutions. I am here to assist with any of your administrative or logistical questions you may have. If you do experience any issues during the webinars, please feel free to chat to me in the chat, or you can shoot me an email over at training@safesystemsolutions.com.au. if you do have any sort of tech issues during the session, the quickest thing that usually fixes it right up is just to leave the webinar and just join right back in. That usually fixes most problems. Anything major, a good old reboot usually does the trick too, but hopefully you don't need to experience any of that today. We would love your interaction during the webinar. So we do have the chat function on the right. Would that be right to your screen? Is it right to your screen? It's right to my screen. So please use the chat function throughout the session to chat with us, myself, Catherine, or Max, and any of your comments throughout the sessions. If you have any particular questions that you would like answered by Max or Catherine, we do have the Q&A function. There you can see Max is pointing to it on the side there. We do have the Q&A function that we would prefer you to use. Pop your questions into the Q&A. Catherine will be busy behind the scenes answering all of your questions, and any curly ones she might throw over to Max to answer throughout the session. All of the presentations are available on our learning management systems as PDFs for you to access at any time throughout the sessions if you'd like to follow on. And you would have received access to our learning management system via email. You should have received your login instructions. Hopefully you will have had a chance to log on and have a look at the course online. If you haven't received your login details by any chance, please let me know. Shoot me a message in the chat or shoot us an email and we can sort out your access, because you will need access to the learning management system to complete the tasks for the course, but we'll run through that a little bit later in further detail. But yeah, please enjoy the session and shoot out if you have any questions for me at all.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Marissa, and your wonderful, exciting background that we've got there. Is there a reason that you're surrounded by delicious plush toys?
Superheroes. There is a reason. I am in the prize pit, as I'd like to call it. And I'm in the prize pit because I'm the one who likes to give out the prizes. Well, technically, Max will give out the prizes and I'll send them out in the mail. But no, we do, as I mentioned, we encourage your interaction throughout the courses, throughout the sessions. So please, any interesting comments, please share them with us. Any of your interesting questions, throw us some curly ones that might trip up our facilitators and we'll shoot you out a prize in the mail. I promise you it won't be a Superman or a Batman, but it'll be something interesting in our stockroom, I assure you. But that's where I'm in the prize pit.
Thank you very much, Marissa. And just a final note, just on the chat, if you can like send either to everyone or to hosts and panelists. If you can just change it to everyone, just so everyone can see it, unless it's something sensitive that you just want to share with hosts and panelists. Just in case we start awarding prizes out and people are unsure, it looks like they're going out to anonymous people, but we can see everything, obviously.
Yes, and in addition to that, also just with your name on just the screen name there on the chat, that what appears to me on the chat, if you can pop in, you know, sometimes we've got a Ben or a David, and I might have quite a few Davids on the course, so just something that I can identify you as to which David you might be, perhaps an initial of your surname or your surname in full, whatever you prefer, just so I know who to shoot the prize out to. Don't want to miss out.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marissa. And I'll keep moving along. We've also got the wonderful Catherine joining us today, who's going to help facilitate the Q&A. And I'll let Catherine do a little summary of yourself.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Marissa. And thanks to Jen for joining earlier on behalf of AGF. Thank you. Lots of people, as always, on this course. So that's wonderful to see across all areas of Oz. Yes, I am Catherine, and I'm the Project Development Lead at Safe System Solutions. And my career started off in WA, so hello to all WA participants. Very close to my heart. I know the infrastructure in that region and can appreciate the challenges there. I have been in Melbourne, Victoria now for, geez, coming on 6 years, 6 and a bit years. Started off in Melbourne and now I'm in regional Victoria, so northeast Vic in the beautiful Alpine region. So cycling is very popular up here, and there's lots of gaps that I would like to work with the council on, but yeah, that's always a challenge, as we know. But yeah, lovely to have a chat with you all through the Q&A, and look forward to the course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thanks for joining and getting involved in facilitating all the questions. Appreciate that. For those I haven't met, my name is Max McArdle. I'm Engineering Operations Manager at Safe System Solutions, and I've been involved in the cycling space for many years now. I started at Vic Roads. One of the first projects I was on was prioritising $100 million Safer Cycling Pedestrian Fund and looking at different projects across Victoria to allocate that funding. But yes, ever since I was a kid, I've been riding a bike, used to ride to school and things like that. It's just my preferred way of getting around, and I'm just super enthusiastic and very lucky to be able to work within a space that can promote that active transport, and something that I'm genuinely passionate about and love to be able to endorse. So excited to present the content for today. My colleague and principal engineer, Ken Beer, yes, you're correct. He does have a mustache. And Marissa, the person that noticed that this photo was taken prior to the mustache, let's give a prize out there. Like, that's how easy it is to get prizes. That's the first prize done. Yeah, you're right. This is an old photo. Ken has a majestic mustache now. He grew the handlebars out during COVID. So that's probably a bit more familiar. But anyway, just he is been part of this training course development, and he's peer reviewed all the content and things like that. So rest assured, we've got eyes across this, and what is being taught and delivered within these training course, as well as all the assignments and extra material, has had that kind of peer review. He would also love to be part of this, but he's regularly double booked on other training sessions. Marissa alluded to earlier, we do have a learning management system. So this is where all of our materials relating to the course is located. So we don't conduct any of the assignments or quizzes by email or anything like that, just because it gets way too messy. The only exception there is Transport for New South Wales, because your IT system doesn't seem to trust us, and you're unable to upload any documents, but I'll speak to that when we get to that hurdle. But everyone else, the learning management system, you should have received an email asking to get set up there. That's where all the material is, all the coursework, what should be graded on and things like that. So it's really essential you've got access to that. And if you can't find the link, it's not in your spam, please reach out to training@safesystemsolutions.com.au, and they'll help facilitate that. I'll give you a bit of a demonstration of what the LMS looks like and how to use it at the end of the session as well. Now, to make sure that we are getting maximum participation and focus on our slides for today, we have introduced a little friend here called Wally the Wombat. And basically, at random times during today, this gorgeous little sign is going to pop up on the slides. And it is your job just to keep a tally of how many times you spot Wally. Now, you can just grab a little scrap piece of paper and just make sure you're marking it down every time you see it, because at the end of the module for today, you'll have a quiz. And one of the questions was, how many times did you spot Wally? So we do this just to make sure that we're getting participants focused on this screen and not having us run in the background and then off reading a book or going sunbaking or something like that. So just trying to make sure that we're getting that engagement. Now, just to clarify, this Wally is not included in the count. So you're currently at zero Wallies, but be sure to have a look out. We do have some core competency benchmark requirements in order to complete the course. So it's not just a matter of clicking you attended this webinar and then you'll get your certificate. We do have some minimum benchmark requirements. So a few of them are, we've got to make sure that you're actually watching all the webinars. As I mentioned before, we certainly prefer you attending live so that you're able to ask any questions, and also just so you can share your own experiences with other participants and peers in the chat. That's fantastic, but acknowledge that that doesn't always work out, and we do provide the recording for you. We also need you to complete all of the coursework that you set. After each module, we talk through exactly what that coursework is. So I'm not going to go through it all right now, otherwise it'll be too much information, but after each session, I'll tell you exactly what you need to do. And we also require participants get a minimum 80% pass mark on all of that coursework. So it is quite high. And the reason it is set that high is because we haven't made it, overly complex or incredibly technically detailed focus that only, specific design engineers would be able to answer. We have tried to make sure that we are accommodating for various skill levels within this space, and acknowledge that not everyone has that, great eye for detail that your detailed design engineers may have. So it's got that within mind. What we'll be mostly marking you on is whether you understand the jargon well, so you're using the correct technical terms, and also that you're suggesting improvements for cycling safety, and it's not going to make things worse. That's generally what will be marked on, but we'll go through the coursework as we finish each module. Of course, we review all of that coursework and we provide feedback. So if you're not meeting that 80%, we will let you know what areas could be strengthened. If that's not clear or you're unsure why you didn't get that 80% or higher, by all means, please just reach out, give us a call, because we're happy to offer one-on-one coaching, if that's required. So it's kind of a failure on us as teachers trying to get you to learn this content if we are failing students. So we just like to make sure that we provide all those avenues for anyone that it could be struggling with the content. By all means, reach out and we'll give you a hand with it. Okay, we will launch the first poll for the module because, as I mentioned, we do like to keep things interactive and save you just listening to my voice for a few hours, give you a chance to reflect on your own skill sets. And the first poll is really just to get an indication of the level of experience participants have in today's course. So the question you may have seen it just jump up on your screen is, please rate your level of cycling infrastructure knowledge. And there's 4 kind of categories: very knowledgeable, aware but don't know much, and not aware. So you're not marked on this poll at all, so don't feel stressed or anything like that. And it is anonymous as well, I'm pretty sure. So we're unable to check it. So yeah, just have a go filling that in, and I'll continue chatting through the course agenda. Which for today, what we're going to be focusing on is off-road bicycle facilities. And most commonly when we have off-road bicycle facilities, they are shared paths, meaning that they're shared with pedestrians. And so we're going to talk about the design elements of a shared path. In particular, we'll go through things like the path width. How do we adopt a nominal width for a shared path? What are the considerations associated with gradients, as well as some common hazards found along shared paths or adjacent shared paths? We will discuss sightlines and the role that fencing can play as well. Inevitably, shared paths cross over the road environment at some stage, so we will have a chat around how we can safely manage that conflict with vehicles. So things like awarding priority to riders and perhaps raising that conflict point. We'll have a good chat around bollards, and I'd love to hear your feedback on bollards as well, and just make mention of DDA requirements, just so we've got that in the back of our mind as well. And the final part of today, we'll be going through what we do when we've got shared paths that cross over other shared paths. And that's when we really need to be very, very clear on assigning priority, ideally provide some wayfinding as well, and managing the speeds there so that we don't have, you know, the opportunity for collisions to occur at those high speeds. All right. I'm going to get stuck straight into the contents, just to make sure that we cover everything off, because there is quite a bit of information to get through for today. So shared path design will be our first category for today's module. And this is actually not an example of a shared path, because this facility here, where we can see the bike riders are traveling, is actually just a dedicated bike lane. So it's only meant for cyclists. It's not meant for pedestrians. Instead, pedestrians are offered the space that's much closer to the waterfront. So this is in the Docklands in Melbourne. And the thinking behind this is one of the most popular routes into the city for commuter cyclists. And so you've got lots and lots of riders traveling through there at relatively high speeds, 20 to 25 kilometers per hour. As you can see, it's very flat here, so it's quite easy to maintain your speed. And basically acknowledges, well, this is also an area where we've got lots of tourist activity and people wanting to spend time near the waterfront. And rather than try and create a shared path where we're expecting both of those transport modes to commingle, instead, we're going to provide two separate facilities. And I think that's a good way to start this discussion, where if you are expecting very high volumes of pedestrians and cyclists, it's not necessarily going to be a great outcome for either user if you try to create a shared path. Because as you can all appreciate, if you've got lots of volumes of both of them, you'll run with the issue of bike riders having to kind of weave in and out of pedestrians, which is just not a comfortable experience for either user. So it's a good reflection of that kind of principle. And to help support that statement, we provide this figure here, and this is out of the Austroads Guide to Road Design, Part 6A. For those that would like any clarification on where these figures and photos and things like that come from, we do provide the sources on the slide themselves. So you're welcome to check the context of these figures, and, you know, just give you that reference there in case you need to dig it out yourself. But this figure here, what we're looking at is along the y-axis, it's saying what is the number of pedestrians two-way per peak hour, which is such a long-winded way of saying, you know, how many pedestrians are you expecting in that area? But just obviously trying to identify when the peak period is. The x-axis, similar kind of thinking, how many cyclists are you expecting during the peak hour? And two ways, so both directions. What I really want you to take from this graph or this figure is if we were to look at just the extremes of both the x and y axes, and we're in the top right-hand corner, sometimes my pen does that, and I'm not sure why. I've tried different pens, and sometimes it fixes itself, but sometimes it goes all glitchy. Let's try again. If we have a look at the top right-hand corner there, you can tell these webinars are live by that kind of little mistakes, though, which is good. So Austroads is actually recommending, let's do a 4 meter wide bike path and a 4 meter wide footpath, because basically you've got such high volumes of pedestrians and such high volumes of cyclists that it's not appropriate to try and make them share one space. Let's separate those facilities. So that kind of helps to provide a bit of reasoning to that previous photo that I showed before, or provide that evidence to why you may be suggesting that as part of your projects, but fully appreciate that a lot of the design work that we are undertaking is in the built environment. We're creating, you know, an 8-meter space for active transport could be very, very challenging. Could mean, you know, knocking down buildings and things like that. So by all means, take all these things with a little grain of salt. You have to reflect on what your constraints are and things like that. But aspirational, it's very good principle to have. Another way that we often derive what our shared path width should be, you know, designed at is this idea of categorizing the function of the shared path. So Austroads has these 3 very broad categories, which is a local access path, a regional path, or recreational path. Now, the latter 2 categories are pretty fluid, and there's a lot of overlap between them, and there's not a tight definition that can easily point you to one or the other. So that's just my take on it. But the local access part, which is shown on the photo of the left, basically that's a shared path that would not really have a significant throughput traffic. So the way that I kind of think about this is, if you've done any road use hierarchy training or understand that philosophy, this is like your local streets, where it's not really designed to have that arterial function. It's just trying to get a few riders into that local area, connecting to a residential community, but not that commuter traffic. That's what the local access path is. And in those environments, we can look to adopt lower widths for shared paths. But I will add a caveat there, where the minimum width that's being recommended there of 2 meters is incredibly narrow. So the photo that's shown there on the left is an example of a 2 meter wide shared path. And you can quite easily see that 2 people walking 2 abreast, there's no space at all for a person on a bike to be able to ride past them or travel in that space. And also what's important to note is, if you've got like furniture adjacent the shared path, so the fence, the signpost, the utility pole, all of those things, they narrow the space even further. So this is not at all a good example of a local access path, and a good reminder that we shouldn't just be going straight to the minimums, because they rarely serve the needs of the community. A regional path, so you're looking between the 2.5 to 4 meter. It may have a commuter function, so that more arterial throughput of traffic, it may be more important for that kind of thing. And the way that the recreational path is slightly different in that regard is the recreational may also have adjacent land uses that would attract pedestrians to dwell. So it could be things like playgrounds or primary schools or things like that, where you'd be expecting, you know, there's going to be people coming from all angles and things like that, and can be slightly wider for those reasons. But it's not a great definition between those 2 categories. And yeah, generally just wanted to say that those tables are a little bit fluffy in the way that they're presented. Okay, we'll have a look at now for a gradient. So we've picked our shared path width, and let's say we're adopting a 3 meter wide shared path. And something that we should be considering is, what is the gradient or the steepness of our shared path? So if you've done, you know, any surveying, you'd certainly be able to work out all your vertical geometry along the alignments. And this graph in particular is used amongst the design community to determine how well received or how feasible constructing a specific grade is for the cycling community. Now, I think that this figure is about 20 years old, probably older. I think maybe even the 90s. So it's been going around for ages. And there probably is an argument to say that if the fleet is looking more and more like e-bikes and uphill gradients is not an issue for them, then perhaps this figure should be recalibrated to kind of reflect that the typical bike is a little bit different. But conversely, we're also seeing more and more heavier bikes as well, like cargo bikes, where they would certainly feel the effects of the uphill grade. So there's lots of that debate going on in industry, like how applicable these types of graphs are, because they were developed so long ago with this idea of what a bicycle looks like, and really the fleet does look quite different to how things looked 30 years ago. So we're on the precipice, I would say, of perhaps looking at things that could look a little bit different going forward. But currently, this is still what's being used within this space, which is why we are going through this content. So that was a big spiel. What we're seeing here is we're seeing two different lines. The solid line, that curve, is representing what would be desirable. So that's kind of like the minimum. Sorry, that would be the maximum. And the dotted would be acceptable. That would be your minimum. So it's okay to do that. And the way to kind of read it is if you've got a really steep grade, so I'll just pick one, just say you got a 10% gradient, that's really significant. Like you would definitely know if you're walking or riding up a 10% grade. It would be desirable to kind of limit that to around 10 meters. If you do it any longer, then most riders either wouldn't be able to do it, would have to get off their bike, or would look for alternative routes so they can avoid that. Now, once again, there is that behavioral side of things where some riders, they actively look out for these 10% grades, and that's a really exciting adventure for them. But this is more reflective of shared path users and trying to acknowledge that, within this space, you're generally designing for riders aged between 8 and 80. So just think of like a grandchild and a grandparent, that kind of demographic. And that's really when it's quite critical. What is probably less well engineered generally is, so you've got the understanding that, uphill gradients, that can be an issue for riders, but we also need to think about if it's a shared path, it is likely two directions, meaning riders would also travel down that steep gradient. Now, I've given this example here. This is a shared path that crosses over a carriageway, so you can see the overhead structure there. And the photo that is taken on the left is kind of positioned right at the top of that ramp. And I've got a question for the group. So get ready to type your answers in the chat. And I want you to try and work out what could be a risk for a rider that is traveling down this ramp. Okay. So question is, what is a risk or risks that you can identify for cyclists riding down this ramp? I'll give you 30 seconds to have a little bit of a think and get your typing fingers warmed up. And I'll just grab a drink of water and I'll check in with Catherine and Marissa if I've missed any questions.
Hello, Max. Thank you very much. Just wanted to make a point that in some jurisdictions, across Australia, you are actually allowed to cycle on the footpath in WA and New South Wales and Queensland, and that's not the case here in Victoria. So just wanted to raise that because I thought that was some good discussions there, because there's also challenges to that, but also some benefits as well.
Yeah, so very good points. Also in Tasmania, you're allowed to ride on
Oh,
footpaths.
there you
There
go.
is a in the LMS, the resources, there is a quite a useful resource guide provided by Victoria Walks, where they actually talk through the issues with shared paths and more broadly riding on the footpath, which does go through some evidence that's been collected over the years and some of the collisions that have happened with people just using the footpath. I kind of understand the argument on both sides, but yeah, it's a good read if you are working within that space.
Yeah, that was really it for now, Max.
Brilliant.
But yeah, lots of people writing some interesting things on this scenario.
There certainly are. Love
Yeah.
to see that feedback. It's really exciting to see everyone's engaged and certainly bringing out some important issues. So yes, speed would be a big one. If you were, you know, at the top of that ramp on your bike and you just let go of the brakes and let gravity carry you down, you'd be quite easily traveling at 20, 25 kilometers per hour, which is, you know, relatively fast. And some people don't feel comfortable riding at those speeds. And also, what I see a few people have identified is at the bottom of the ramp is a conflict point. So we've got a connecting shared path at the bottom of the ramp. In other words, where you've got the high speeds from the riders traveling downhill, you've also introduced a conflict point where it's possible for riders to collide with other pedestrians or riders, which is not a great scenario at all. So I think that's great that we've already picked up on that. And I also think it's great that people have identified that there are sightline issues with the kind of nice fencing balustrade area that's being used there on the side. That actually provides like a solid wall, basically. So it's very, very difficult for you to be able to see any riders that may be approaching that conflict point. So not an ideal scenario. We actually conducted a road safety audit or a cycling safety audit at this particular site and picked up on this as a finding and recommended that instead of having the conflict point right where we've got those sideline issues and we've also got the high speeds for riders, can we move the conflict point, you know, further away so it's much easier to see, and also riders have washed off some of that speed. And very happy to report that that has been constructed since, and we don't have that sightline issue there. So Marissa, I'll let you pick a prize out of some of those responses. Appreciate there were a few people that gave that response, so I'll let you work out the winner there. But the reason we included that is just a reminder that uphill gradients, you know, we've got a figure in the Austroads that we can calibrate what would be acceptable or desirable, but it's also good practice to also think about what a rider's doing in the opposite direction, and are there any specific risks that we should be concerned about if there's high traveling speeds. All right, so we've got here a cyclist envelope. So for those that have done any, you know, road design, traffic engineering, you'd be familiar with the concept that passenger vehicles and heavy vehicles, they have a design envelope, which is basically how wide and how tall they are and the clearances that they require. Bike riders have the same thing. So just wanted to let you be aware of that one in case you haven't seen this. Interestingly, there are some peculiar changes depending on which jurisdiction you're in. So the Austroads has slightly different figures to the one that's shown here, which is from New South Wales. So make sure that you are referencing what is applicable to your state or territory, because there are slight discrepancies. It's mostly to do with the height clearance. Anyway, generally what we take as an operating width for the bicycle and rider is 1 meter wide. It's nice and easy to remember. And for a head clearance, this is more where we see a bit of a discrepancy. It can be between 200 and 500 mil, New South Wales 200 mil. And where that is most relevant is where you've got shared paths that kind of cross underneath a carriageway. So it could go, you know, via an underpass or through culverts or something like that. That's where that head clearance is quite important. So the height of the bicycle and rider is 2.2 meters. You want to ensure that you've got another 200 mil there, so we're not knocking off people's helmets or heads or anything like that. The other really important aspect of this figure is how far away do we consider a hazard to be a hazard? And the half meter there being used as desirable, I would say just remember that as the figure, because that is definitely the rule of thumb that we use within industry. If it's within half meter of that envelope, that's what we kind of consider as being a hazard. The 0.2 meter minimum, that's only really applicable if the feature is designed to be struck by a cyclist. So a flexible paddle or cycle-friendly fencing or something like that. But half meter for anything that's rigid and could be a hazard. I've also included just another figure just as a reminder of what kind of speeds are kind of typical for riders. For those that don't actually ride and you're not 100% sure, generally the shared paths, you know, you'd be riding kind of 15 to 25 kilometers per hour. People on road can travel much faster than that. But yeah, children and families and cargo bikes and all those types of things, probably around the 10 kilometer per hour mark. So just wanted to give you that appreciation of the speeds that we're talking about in these environments. The other thing that I was just going to note with the cycling envelope is that the 1 meter wide is generally taken in flat terrain, but if you are working in an uphill environment, it's actually common for bike riders to, you know, go left and right and kind of wobble in order to get that momentum to get up the hill. And that can actually increase the envelope to around 1.5 meters. So if you're working in those types of terrains, you may be looking at widening your facilities to basically allow for riders to be able to do that and not collide with oncoming riders or any of the hazards adjacent to the path. And speaking of hazards adjacent to the path, ties into my next little slide, which is, I suppose, some common ones that we find. We do conduct shared path audits, and like to make a note of what I suppose are some common appearances. So things like bins or furniture more in general that are situated within the shared path instead of being, you know, pushed away from the edge of the path. Would have been a better idea to have flipped this one around to mirror that so the pole is not on the shared path. Another really common one is having drop-offs. So it's a bit challenging to see in this photo, but this is a concrete shared path. And from what I can assess, it looks like when this was constructed, construction crew went out there and they've formed up their concrete path. They've taken away the formwork. That's it, job done. Well, you basically just left this 125 mil drop, which is not a significant, you know, hazard in the long scheme of things. However, if you're riding and you happen to come off around this curve, it's virtually impossible for you to be able to get back onto that shared path because of that significant lip, 125 mil or so. So the easy solution there is just making sure that whenever you are building these things, just to make sure that you're battering up all the way to the top of the path so you don't have any of that level difference there. The last photo that I wanted to share for the hazards, it's two-part really. One is vegetation. Vegetation once it becomes overgrown, can actually encroach into that cycling envelope, meaning riders have to kind of duck or move out of their way to avoid vegetation. So having that regular maintenance regime is a good thing to be able to schedule and periodically examine. But the other thing to note within this photo is the utility pole. That's actually quite well blocked by that vegetation as well. So the edge of the path is roughly there. And before, when I was talking about, you know, anything that's within a ½ meter of the cyclist envelope could be considered a hazard. In practice, the way that we actually measure that envelope is we just take it as the edge of the shared path. So in other words, if you grab the edge of this shared path and then measure ½ meter back, and any fixed object, rigid structure or anything like that, within that space could be identified as a hazard. So this pole in particular, that would be considered a hazard with that kind of thinking in place. There's a few ways, of course, you can go about reducing that as a risk, and in a perfect world would be able to relocate that pole, move it outside of that ½ meter clearance, or would be able to, you know, underground the asset and things like that. But appreciate that those are relatively expensive things, and it's not going to cause a great deal of harm if riders are riding into it. It's going to be annoying, it's going to be broken bones, but it's unlikely to be on the black spot list or anything like that. So what we have seen in practice used are basically measures to highlight the hazard. So in this instance, we've got some flexible paddles that are being used to delineate the edge of the path. So this is a sign gantry column, and it has been installed in a way that means it has to narrow the shared path. So the way that that has been, you know, helped to demarcate, so riders are aware that there's a narrowing occurring. You can see that there's a little bit of line marking being used, but also the paddles, the flexible paddles themselves, just to show that, you know, there is this narrowing occurring. By all means, once again, this is not best practice. These are just pragmatic solutions if you are working in with constrained budgets and sites and things like that. This is a relatively recent job, like constructed 5 years ago maybe. And I think there was a real missed opportunity during the construction and during the design phases of this not to have identified this. Ideally, this would have been installed, you know, a meter or so setback, so that the shared path width can maintain, you know, maintain that facility all the way through. You don't have to worry about any of this, and then just installing retaining walls or some kind of structure there, so all of that embankment isn't going to fall off and into the shared path there. So really good example of, you know, if you're in the design phase of things, it's much better to pick up on these as issues early and try and, you know, reduce that risk as much as possible, as opposed to trying to just highlight the hazard, which is not really getting rid of that as a risk. All right, I've got some sightline calculations, and for those that are not designers or engineers and this looks a little bit like Latin, that's okay. This will not be part of your quiz or anything like that. So don't get stressed. We're not going to make you do any of these calculations. But we did want to include this just as a reminder for those that are involved in the technical design, that there are stopping sight distance calculations for riders. So you probably used to doing these sight distance checks for vehicles or approaching intersections and, you know, getting the minimum gap and things like that. Very similar calculation applies for bicycle riders. So we just wanted to make sure that you're aware of that. And the calculation is important for both the horizontal geometry. So that's like the curve around a bend, but also for vertical geometry. So whether there's a crest. So just wanted to make you all aware of that. And I'll speak more about those sightline requirements in a second, but I'll check in first with Marissa.
Hi, Max.
Hello.
Been some discussions around magpies.
Oh,
And now I know magpies are kind of dear to your heart in a different kind of way, especially
they
the
certainly are.
AFL 2023 Premier type magpies. But that's not the one I'm referring to at the moment. We've just got some discussion around magpies and being hazards. So the question is, are magpies and other swooping birds considered as hazards in shared path audits to consider for warning signage treatments similar to animal crossings?
Great issue. So if I was doing a shared path audit and I identified an area of concern, I think my role as an auditor would be purely to note that as an area of risk or anything like that. As an engineer, I have no idea what can be done there. And I don't think I should be making any recommendations because that's just not my field of expertise. I'd be saying liaise with, an environmental officer or an arborist if you've got to go get rid of the tree or something like that, but not really a call for me to make. So it's something that you could pick up during an audit. But yeah, you've got to acknowledge kind of where your skills lie. And it's actually a similar vein. I'm going to take a little tangent here of if you were doing a shared path audit and there was a feeling of, the threat to personal safety or something like that, like people didn't feel comfortable walking through there at night because it's, adjacent parklands and people can hide in bushes and under bridges and stuff like that. Once again, you could bring that up if you were auditing the design, but if you were, it's not really your position to say this is a solution that could definitely reduce the risk of any of those personal security threats, because if you were auditing it, you kind of have to stick to what would engineering design tell you would be an appropriate solution. So instead, just leave that to the fields of experts that can deal with that stuff.
Yeah, we've had Georgia suggest that, perhaps shade structures could be, added along sections of paths. And Danielle's unfortunately let us know that there's been a fatality on a shared pathway due to a magpie hit. So that's a little bit unfortunate.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. I've never heard of that before. Okay.
Hand it over to Catherine.
I was just going to chime in on the magpie subject. It is frightening. We have one out the front of our house, and we do see school children, obviously during springtime when they're looking after their babies, and that's when they become most aggressive. Kids and cyclists going past and just watching them get swooped. It's awful. I think many people have been swooped, whether you're walking or cycling, and it's terrifying. So that loss of control when you're on the bike is certainly a high risk. And I think as Max mentioned, from an audit perspective, we can certainly highlight these issues. I know we reported to council the issue. I mean, they've got specialists, I guess, within the council that can look into it. But it's definitely a specialist area, but certainly a hazard.
Good stuff. Thanks for sharing your own input there, Catherine. And I've actually been really lucky. I've never been swooped by a magpie. And I think that's because I do barrack for the team. I get swooped by minor birds and blackbirds all the time. No problem there. But magpies, they leave me alone. They recognise the familiarity.
I think it's because I'm a Freo supporter. They see the purple and they're like, get out of here.
That's right.
There you go. But no, my sister, when she was quite young and going off to work every day, she she's terrified of them because
Yeah.
she used to get attacked. But yeah, it's a serious thing. But
There you
anyway,
go. Well,
there you go.
We'll try and focus on the engineering component. Apologies, we don't have all the solutions, but it's good to know. It's good to provide the anecdotes and share your feedback, because others may have the answers. It's probably actually a good time now just to have a little break. So we like to make sure that everyone's got a chance just to, have a little stretch or go and get some water or anything like that. So I'm going to take 3 minutes now where we'll pause and we'll stop the recording and give you a chance to go to the bathroom or do whatever you need to do. And we'll get started again in 3 minutes. Hopefully you managed to get a little stretch in. We'll continue with the content. So this was just relating to the sightline requirements and why that calculation is important. This was specifically for horizontal curves. So that's just a fancy way to say like bends in the alignment. And basically the reason that you want to do these sight checks is if there was an object, something that the rider would like to avoid, that they've got adequate stopping distance to be able to avoid it. So they're not going to be forced to ride into it. So that's what those sightline checks are for. Just as an example of, this in real life, this is a shared path. It's a sealed shared path. It might not look it, but it's asphalt. So you could be traveling relatively fast. And because you've got this vegetation that's overgrown, you can't see around the bend, meaning that there could be a hazard, situated just behind there, that is completely invisible before it's, right in front of you kind of thing. So that's the purpose of those sightline checks. It's really, really common to be recommending, trimming of vegetation to open up those sightlines, or if you're during the design process, moving the vegetation further away, closer to the center of the radius, just to make sure that you don't have these issues. We may implement fencing depending on what the adjacent shared path area looks like. And Austroads have 2 categories for fencing. One is called a partial barrier fence, and the other is called a full barrier fence. And I'll explain exactly what those 2 are in a second. And where you would likely be applying them is whether there is a drop-off, which is shown in the left figure, or there's a steep batter, just a steep embankment next to it. So looking at the table on the left, where you may require a fence is relative to X, which is the distance from the edge of the path to where that drop-off commences, and Y, which is the height of that drop-off. So the first scenario where fence is not required, if X is less than 2 and Y is less than 250 mil. And you'll see that this one has got the asterisk, and it's a little bit small to read there, but the asterisk is saying, well, don't worry about a fence. Instead, just batter off the surface where the fall is within 1 meter of the path. So the battering off is what I was referring to before, is just make sure that you've got a fill material and you just fill that all in and, compact it down. It's much better to use that as a solution rather than a fence. If the drop-off is between 250 mil to 2 meters, and 2 meters is huge, like that's a really big drop-off, that's when you could do a partial barrier fence. Anything bigger than that, a full barrier fence. Similar kind of idea with the embankments, and the relationship that is used is once again the X, which is just the distance from the edge of the shared path to the batter hinge point, or where the batter starts, which is that point there. And the ratio that's used is 1 to Z. So for those that are familiar with, you know, slopes, batter slopes and things like that would be familiar. Yeah, just basically saying the steeper that it gets, the more likely you require that fencing. Partial barrier fence is when it's between 1 to 3 for Z, or full barrier when it's less than 1. And when it's 1 to 1, remember that's like 45-degree angle. It's very, very steep. So the two categories of the fencing there, partial barrier and full barrier fence, this is what they look like. The one on top is the partial fence. And the reason it's referred to as that is because it's got these openings. So theoretically, people can still fall through it. And we actually had a participant a few months ago that shared a story of their child that was riding along a shared path and fell through one of those gaps. So it does still pose issues, and it does not have the same containment as the full barrier fence, which is shown below. So that's where you've got the vertical members all the way through. Completely eliminates the risk of anyone falling through that. You could theoretically still fall over it, go over the fence, but it's pretty unlikely. In my opinion, this is very much overcomplicating this issue, and I'm not really sure why they went with this approach. But it must be much more expensive, I'm guessing, to be installing these things than the partial. But anyway, the most important feature in my mind, whether you're doing either of these styles of fencing, is to ensure that you're providing a smooth rail. So you can see it's provided in both of those general arrangement cross-section views. And the purpose of that smooth rail is it is, what's the word? Deliberately set up so that if a rider is losing control and is veering from their path, their shoulder to their elbow is going to collide with that smooth rail. So that's going to be the point of collision. It makes it much more likely for them to be able to stay on their bike and not become destabilized or go over the handlebars or go over the fence or anything like that. So the smooth rail, smooth deflection rail, it's also referred to as cycle-friendly fencing. It's just this idea of you've got a protruding rail that's just got this nice smooth feature, so it's just a lot nicer to run into. Now, one of the silly things about this particular example is if you've got any of those cycle-friendly fencings and you also need to install signage, by all means, make sure that the sign is going on the outside of the fence, because you don't want riders running into the fence and then just being dragged into the sign instead. Like, that's defeats the purpose of this. So you want to move that onto the outside instead. A few other fencing things. We want to make sure that we're using rounded posts, nothing with any sharp edges, nothing that could be snagged on handlebars or things like that. So that's why the protruding rail there, that reduces the risk of handlebar snagging, because your arm's going to hit the thing instead of the handlebar. Nothing that curves inwards or anything like that. Also be mindful that low fences can be a hazard for riders. So things like planter boxes in particular, that can be a pedaling risk. So the height that's generally used there is between 200 mil and 250 mil. Anything higher than that could strike a rider's pedal and cause that kind of issue. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that one as well. All right, so we've gone through quite a bit of info about the shared path design, and we might launch another poll just to see what everyone's take is on fences in particular. So I will move this down a little bit so you can have a bit better of a look. And the question is, do you reckon we should be installing fencing along this shared path. And I'll just do a little drawing of what I'm talking about. Like, do you reckon we should put a fence somewhere here? Yes or no is the poll question. I'll give you 30 seconds to have a go at that, and I'll check in with Catherine.
Hello, Max. A question around fencing. Is a vegetated barrier acceptable?
I wouldn't say so, because the cycle-friendly fencing is actually set with that protruding rail between 1.2 and 1.5, which is deliberately designed to hit the rider's arm. I think you'd have a challenging argument to use any type of vegetation that could provide that, you know, deflecting property. If you were using vegetation like this, you know, where it's nice and flat and things like that, then there wouldn't be a need for a fence at all. But I think I just gave away the poll question then. But anyway.
I set you up there, didn't I, Max?
Yeah, whoops.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank
Yeah.
you. But yeah, vegetation, we do talk about that, don't we? Ways that it can be used effectively.
Yeah, it comes up in various
Yeah.
topics. Yeah.
Thanks, Max.
No worries. Maybe we'll just end the poll there and we can share the results. So we're seeing majority of people saying no, we don't need the fence there, which I do tend to agree. For those that did say yes, yeah, perhaps you're concerned about the sign post, which is a rigid hazard. And before I mentioned that we'd use a 0.5 meter offset, and you know, I didn't actually provide that distance there, so that could be 400 mil, so that could fit within that hazard category, and maybe a fence is the answer there. But generally, have a look at the surrounding use, and if riders are straying off the path and riding into landscaped areas, it's not really going to cause too much damage. Whereas having like long lengths of fencing can have a few issues. Some to do with like the urban landscape is kind of eroded. You've kind of got this tunneling effect. You're treating riders like cattle. This is only the place you can go. There's the maintenance issue with more and more fencing and things like that. So it doesn't need to be applied in every context, but there's probably some debate around exactly when and where you would go for that. Anyway, I wanted to, Catherine, another question.
Apologies to interrupt there. Just a question around sightline issues. If we are installing fences and there is a sightline issue, what's the substitute there, Max?
Anything to substitute for fence if there's sightline issues to it?
Yeah.
I might need to look at a specific example to help with that feedback, because I'm struggling to picture that scenario.
Cheers. Thanks, Max.
No worries. Happy to follow that one offline, but we'll get into the topic now of shared paths where they cross over roads. So inevitably, it's not just off-road path for forever and ever and ever. There's going to be points along the network where we'll need to cross over roads, and this is just about how we can manage those conflicts. This example is actually relatively unique because the shared path is in the median of a divided carriageway. So you've got a traffic lane, multiple traffic lanes that on that side of the divided carriageway, and then on the other side, you can't really see the lanes, but they run that way as well in the opposite direction. And these are points within the middle of the divided carriageway, just openings to let vehicles access local streets and also perform U-turns. The way that the conflict with the shared path has been managed is the shared path is on one consistent grade. Another way to phrase that is the carriageway or the road level has been raised up. You can kind of see that it's like a speed hump. You can see the ramps there. And industry considers this best practice where you are crossing shared paths to crossover roads, because the raised feature does a much better job of clearly articulating who has got the priority. So in this case, the priority is shared path users. So pedestrians and riders have got the right of way. The other really beneficial thing, not just confirming who's got the priority, but the raised feature in itself washes off speeds for motorists. Motorists are much more likely to slow down when there's a hump or vertical deflection, so they're already much more likely to give way. But if they fail to miss any of those signs and they fail to miss the hump itself, the physical vertical deflection and those ramps will actually slow down vehicle speeds, meaning if a collision does occur, it's likely to be at survivable speeds. So big fan of providing raised crossings where you do have shared paths that cross over roads. I've got these two examples here. The photo on the left is an example out of Melbourne, which is a raised crossing point of the shared path. The photo on the right is from Brisbane, which is also a raised crossing point of the shared path. Now, the preferred one that I like is the example on the left. And I'd like in the chat for you to suggest any reasons why I would be nominating the one on the left as best practice for design, as opposed to the one on the right. So they're both functioning the same way. They're both forcing motorists to yield. They're both saying give way. They've both got raised facilities. So as I spoke before, we like to raise that conflict point to make sure that we are slowing down traffic and make it more likely for them to yield. But certainly my preferred option here is the left one. And I can see those answers are flooding in, which is very exciting to see. And I'll give you another 15 seconds just for those that haven't finished typing yet. I'll check in with Catherine.
No, these examples are always good to talk to, Max. Anything raised is fantastic, isn't it?
That's right. It's very
Yeah.
strong, safe system alignments if you're raising the conflict points.
That's it. Yeah. No, some good answers coming through.
Oh, Anthony rides the one on the right weekly. There you go. I'm not trying to throw any shade at the one on the right. The one on the right is good. I think the one on the left is slightly better, but that's okay. The one on the right is still very good. Yeah, so this is more or less what I was talking about at the start of how different jurisdictions kind of do different things. So in Victoria, we do a yellow pavement marking for a shared path crossing. Up in Brisbane, you can see they're using the green, and then they've also got red for the ramp approaches and things like that. The signage is a little bit different as well. So all of those details, that's just jurisdictional stuff. I don't think it has a significant impact on how legible it is for motorists and things like that. But it's just one of the quirks of working in different states and territories. Anyway, I've seen it mentioned multiple times, so we'll give out a prize, Marissa, to the person that mentioned this fourth, so not the first one. Just we like to give prizes out, even if you're not the quickest typer. You'll still get a prize. We'll still look after you. So the fourth person that typed in the sightline challenges associated with the example on the right. So if you were writing down and getting ready to cross over this, although you've got priority, it's pretty difficult for you to be able to turn back on yourself and just do a quick head check to make sure that there's not a vehicle going through. It's also a vehicle may not really appreciate if they're giving way. They may only expect to give way to users oncoming and not necessarily think to look the other way. Wherever we do have conflict points, we try to make them as close to perpendicular as possible because they maximize the sight lines. So it's just a lot easier as a bike rider to be able to spot if that vehicle is going to yield, and also for that motorist to spot the cyclist and, you know, make that eye contact. So it's a lot easier when that perpendicular conflict point is provided. That Brisbane example, fully appreciate the constrained sights and things like that. And basically got to work with the geometry that you've got there, but I think it just articulates that sight line requirement quite well there. Here's a photo of what this site actually looks like on the ground, and you can see that there has been quite a lot of sudden braking, you know, with all the skid marks there from riders. So perhaps emphasizing that at the last minute, riders are forced to engage in emergency braking because the vehicle hasn't yielded. And yeah, anyway, just wanted to share that one as well. Okay, we'll move on to bollards. So we spoke before, best practice, if you're crossing over a road, is let's raise the conflict point, let's award the priority to pedestrians and to bike riders. Unfortunately, we have lots and lots and lots of examples of not doing that and instead installing bollards, because the idea is, you know, bollards can be used to disencourage any vehicle entry, but also be used as a bit of a sign that riders are approaching a road. And they shouldn't be used as that type of treatment at all. They shouldn't be used to slow down cyclists because they should be identified for what they are, which are hazards. So I spoke before that anything within a ½ meter of the edge of a shared path that's fixed would be considered a hazard. Bollards are really, really common to install right in the middle of a shared path and absolutely should be considered a hazard. So just some examples of one, you know, you've got 3 bollards being used there that's going to tighten up cycling movements there and things like that. This one in the middle is just a terrible example of not providing a contrasting material. So it just blends in very, very well with the surrounding bluestone in that area. And the final example, once again up in Queensland, is the banana bars, which are no longer installed and are in fact getting ripped out because of that squeezing effect as well. So not used, not recommended anymore. We've got lots of different bollard types, so timber bollards, chicane treatments, they can be quite popular as well. The thing that you need to be mindful of with the chicane type of treatment is whether or not there's actually enough space for cyclists to do that type of movement comfortably. Particularly if you've got cargo bikes, you can see cargo bikes get stuck in this area or find it really, really uncomfortable to maneuver if that geometry is too tight. So something just to be mindful of. And final one that we've got here, this is riding into Hobart there and using this U type of bollard once again to make riders aware that they're about to approach a road. I think that putting this solution in place, you know, which is a 24/7 hazard, is a little bit naive and something that we're just used to seeing and something that we've done historically. But instead, we should be acknowledging that these are hazards. People do ride into them quite frequently. And of course, if you look at it in this context where there's no riders around, it seems like the most obvious thing. And you're like, how could people ride into that? Well, what is the most common scenario is when you've got riders in a bunch or there's pedestrians or whatever, and the person who's at the front of that pack may very well be able to see the bollard and they're going to do a quick little maneuver around it. But riders behind within that pack are completely oblivious, and that's when those types of collisions can occur. So just my 2 cents on it. Have a think about it. Do they really need to be installed? You know, what's the risk? How likely is it that we're going to get vehicle entry at this location? And moreover, why this location? Couldn't cars just enter at any point in time? And does that mean we need to have bollards everywhere? But the other kind of thinking I like to do here is we would never, ever put a fixed hazard in a traffic lane where we're just like, you know, you need to slow down and get ready to give way to a train, for instance. You know, you wouldn't use that. That's not a feasible solution. And I think we should be a bit more strategic about when we install these things and identify what are the risks that we're looking at. Marissa.
Yeah, thanks, Max. What about flexible paddles instead of rigid bollards?
Good points. So the flexible bollards probably not installed all that much because, as I mentioned, historically they've been installed to deter the vehicle entry. And if vehicles worked out that it's flexible, or specifically if it's like on a spring or something like that, vehicles may still access that space, which would, you know, significantly alter their effectiveness. But I've got a little example of what could be used instead as an end treatment. Thanks, Marissa. We'll give a prize out there, though.
Great, will do. We've just got another comment. How do you prevent vehicles entering a shared path? What would be the alternative solution?
Yeah, I've got a figure coming up in a second that can provide a bit of context
Great.
there. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Max.
No worries. Just wanted to highlight this as a real example. So this was Andrew, who was riding home from work a couple of years ago on the shared path just adjacent our office in Brunswick. And he rode into the bollard that we can see there on the left. And as you can also see, it's clearly been struck several times. Once council heard that, you know, there'd been this incident, they went out there the next day and they gave it a fresh coat of paint and some more delineation tape and things like that, but the physical hazard was still there. When Andrew collided with it, he did, break his wrist and had some facial injuries and things like that. Called up the ambulance, and whilst he was waiting for the ambulance, he witnessed 3 other riders hit the same bollard. So we do have a police crash record of Andrew because he went to the hospital and there was a report that was, you know, issued and things like that. But those other cyclists, we do not have any data that there was a collision there other than that experience. So it's a good reminder that they are hit very often and most commonly underreported. We know that cycling crashes are incredibly underreported because riders do not know who to talk to. So just be mindful that they are real hazards. This was the figure I was alluding to. Well, what can we do where we are terminating at a road? And it's basically the idea of using a splitter island, some kind of splitter island treatment. So as the off-road shared path facility approaches the carriageway, you'd use things like line marking or tactile edge line marking and deviate the path with the inclusion of, could be using, you know, curb and channel and some asphalt infill or something like that. Or it could be using landscaping, low-level landscaping. It's also possible to put a bollard within that space if you were able to maintain that half-meter offset from the edge of the path there. Those kind of solutions work a lot better. It really makes it clear that riders are no longer on the shared path, that they're approaching a carriageway and they need to slow down. And it will also do a very good job of deterring that vehicle entry. Here's somewhat of an example of this in practice, where you can see that there is a little bit of a splitter island that's been installed at this termination point, and some grassing. And this is where bollards can be suitably installed because you've maintained that clearance from the edge of the shared path. The other thing that we like about this example is those bollards have got solar panels on the top of them. So they actually, generate all that energy during the day, and then at nights we've got lights on them so that they can be illuminated during low light conditions. So ensuring that they're visible at all hours of the day. So quite a good solution there. This is just a reminder that if you are doing any shared paths, you need to consider that these are accessible to all members of the public, including those with disabilities. And therefore, all clauses of the Disability Discrimination Act or the DDA, all those requirements are still prevalent. And mostly what that comes in the form of is the tactile ground surface indicators, TGSIs, or the little kind of braille plates that sit before you cross a road, still applicable at shared paths where they're interacting with the road environment. So make sure that you're always referring to your DDA clauses to make sure you're compliant there, because those people with vision impairments still need to be made aware that they're crossing a carriageway. Okie dokie. So we've got shared paths now crossing over other shared paths. And to give myself a little break here, this is another opportunity for you to chime in with your own thoughts. And the question that we've got for you is, what's wrong with this photo? So we've got a really confused looking cyclist there. And question for everyone in the group is, why do you think she's confused? What's wrong with this photo? So I'll get her out of the way so you can have a good look at that. And while I wait, I'll check in with Catherine if I've missed any questions.
All good at the moment, Max.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. No, it's all ticking along well. There was a question that actually came in about managing dirt bikes on shared paths.
Yeah. No, that's very valid. So the some of the bollards are deliberately spaced so close together so that dirt bikes can't fit within there. I still don't think that's a good solution, because I guess it depends on how regularly you're experiencing that access from dirt bikes, but I feel like enforcement activities may be, a bit more of a push for that way to actually kind of deal with that as an issue, as opposed to putting infrastructure, which is also a hazard for all bike riders that travel through there. But yeah, it's a pretty good debate, and people will have different opinions on that as to what would actually be the best solution for the community.
That's right. And it's quite a unique situation, isn't it, in I guess more of those regional areas.
Yeah.
There is that dirt bike activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Lots and lots of answers that have come through there. Was there anything else there, Catherine? Or no, she's hopping off.
Oh, sorry. Yes, there was a couple of questions that came in. Did you want to talk through this first, or?
No, we'll do the questions
No,
first.
all good. So installing a bollard, does any lighting requirements need to be satisfied? I think that was the question.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware, no. I mean, generally bollards are installed approaching a carriageway where there would likely be lighting requirements. And shared paths, once again, they also have lighting requirements, but the specific hazard itself, I'm not familiar with any lighting standards that needs to be complied with. But if anyone knows differently, by all means, let me know.
And I guess that's, I haven't really thought about it like that, because there's always that reflective tape on the bollards, isn't there? And ensuring that they stand out as best as you can. But in terms of lighting requirements, I'm not familiar with that. Yeah, good question. Thanks, Max.
No worries. Okay. Yeah, so thanks for all the feedback in the chat, and great to see that we're seeing some common themes coming through there. So the lack of wayfinding, absolutely. That's something that really upset me when I was riding this route a while ago. You've got this fork in the road and just no way of knowing which way to go. And I had to actually get off my bike and get Google Maps up and work out which route to take, it's not a significant safety risk or anything like that. It's just frustrating. It's just annoying. So definitely think we need to be doing better within that space, wherever you are providing these, connections, just like we do on the roads as well. But the priority, I also think, is a really, really important one and something that we should be considering. So Marissa, we'll give a prize out to the 5th person that mentioned priority. And for those that are not familiar with what that term means, it basically just assigning one of these legs as the major route, or where the majority of traffic will go through, and making the other leg give way or stop, and just clarify exactly how that conflict is going to be managed. So exact same principles as what we would do on our transport network, just applied here. Another good tip would be trying to square up any of your conflict points. So bringing the shared path out like this instead, so it looks more like a T intersection. And then, yeah, putting your stop line in there, and then putting your stop signs or give way signs or whatever it is. Just the T intersection is a lot better at ensuring that that leg that is meant to yield will actually yield. So yeah, great notes in there, and it's good to see that lighting has been picked up there as well. Yeah, lots of good answers. Austroads actually did develop a report on bicycle wayfinding, because across our jurisdictions we do lots of different practices on the way that we kind of highlight where this journey is going and things like that. And it hasn't provided, this is how we're going to harmonize this going forward or anything like that. Instead, it's reflecting on what would be the most recognizable and understood by the community, and suggesting that these are changes that could be made within industry. But I think it's a kind of sheds lights, or it speaks volumes on the importance of the issue. If Austroads are willing to spend, X amount of dollars to complete a research report in a very niche field, there's likely a reason for that. And the reason is we're just not very good at doing bicycle wayfinding in Australia. We tend to forget about it, or it's just an afterthought and doesn't get installed, and all these types of things. So just a reminder there that if you are working in shared path space, to make sure that you're developing your signage scheme that is consistent with your jurisdiction and provides that wayfinding for riders throughout. This is just one example of what wayfinding may look like. It's really not a complex topic. You just want to provide, what are the distances to certain locations, and using the bicycle symbol there and the blue in this instance as the color, just to clearly identify that that is meant for bike riders. Okay, so not really rocket science to get an understanding of what the wayfinding is meant to communicate. But we do see that it's used incredibly frequently in other jurisdictions. So this is international. The photo on the left is Denmark, where very common to use a numbering system. So, if you're on route number 2 will go from the central train station all the way to the market square in the city. And even if you don't understand a word of Danish and can't read any of the language, you know that if you follow number 2, you're pretty safe. So I think that's a really, really good approach within this space. Similarly, in the photo on the right-hand side there, we've got an example out of the Netherlands, which is using also an idea of the numbering of the different routes, and then also providing a little, you are here map, and this is where all the routes go. Once again, just making it as easy and accessible and attractive for riders as possible. Alrighty. Now, when we do have shared paths that cross over other shared paths, we want to be really careful of how we manage our speeds. So the example that I've got here is actually City West train station, just in Perth there. And you can see at this side of the photo, there's the train tracks, and this is like that pedestrian gate interchange. So during peak periods, you'd have lots of people queuing up the other side of the tracks, waiting to get across, and then the gate would open and you just get this flood of pedestrian traffic, always, heading across the shared path or the bicycle path there, and then up towards the platform or the concourse. And because you've got this hive of activity occurring in waves, it was some thinking done of, we need to make sure that riders are slowing down within their space so that they're aware that, this kind of surge of activity does occur. And the way that this has been designed and installed is similar to what we would do in a traffic environment. Is, well, let's do some curb and channel. Let's do a splitter island. Let's change the color of the pavements. They've also put a little give way pavement marking symbol there as well. All of these features are used to show to riders here that there's something pretty different about this environment. So you should be slowing down and expect to give way at this location. Now, of course, some riders that are familiar with this environment are just going to ignore all of those signs and ride through at speed and weave in and out. Another solution that could be utilized within this space, things like, so we spoke about it before with where we're trying to get vehicles to slow down and they're crossing over a shared path. We raise that facility. The same premise and principle applies for shared paths as well. You could install a raised crossing for pedestrians here. Probably not the greatest little sketch there, but pedestrians are on this raised surface, and these ramp grades could slow down that cycling traffic. Once again, vertical deflection is really king because it's very, very effective at slowing down speeds and making people more aware that there is priority changes or changes to the environment that they need to be aware of. So just another solution that could have been looked at here. Now, something else that often gets installed at locations where you do have that influx of pedestrian activity is things like pavement markings, slow down, or even signage that says, pedestrians crossing and things like that. I personally don't think there's a lot of benefit in doing markers like that, other than it looks like you're trying to do something. I don't think they're incredibly effective because by the time you read that pavement marking, you're probably already at the conflict point. So they're not really the most graceful solution there. But anyway, you might see them out and about. That was all the content for today. So congratulations, we've all made it through module 1. I did want to spend a bit of time on the LMS, but just to close out today's session, I thought it was important to reflect on how we close out our shared paths, and having a good think about whether we are meeting the community's demands and what they would like to see and if we're connecting them from A to B. So this is an example of a shared path where just putting up the shared path end sign and that's it, job done. It's not a great scenario at all because, you know, you can see by the goat tracks there that some people want to continue and, you know, how is that going to be managed? So have a real think about where you're ending your shared paths, that it ends in a suitable location and you're not promoting continued travel through this area. And the reason that this in particular is quite a significant risk is this is an arterial road. There's a huge roundabout, multi-lane roundabout. And yeah, it's not a great environment to be trying to push more riders in. And you can say, I'm not trying to push them in because I've said that the path ends sign, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So make sure you're having a think about the strategic function of your routes as well, and that you're able to provide those connections in there. Catherine.
We have been informed by David and Ben that this has been fixed.
It has been fixed. I
Fantastic.
drove past it the other week and I was like, oh, should I take it out of my course? But then I was I mean I could find plenty of other examples of
Oh,
shared
yes.
path end signs.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben.
But yes, thanks for letting us know that has been fixed, and we'll give a prize out for those people that mentioned that. Okie dokie. So the LMS, this is what we've been referring to, and hopefully you have a screen that looks familiar. Under the welcome banner, there is the link to all our webinars in case you get lost at any stage. An opportunity just for you to say hello, introduce yourself and tell us where you work and your level of experience. If you ride a bike at all, that'd be great. We've got the resources that I mentioned earlier today, reference documents and resources. So everything that we talk about within the content is saved there. So you can do your own fact checking in case you're not 100% convinced in what we're going through. The AGF website, safecycling.org.au, is through there. There is an additional resource that we don't provide in this tab called the Global Designing Cities Initiative. We actually just send you to their website. They keep a track of everyone that downloads it, so you have to kind of request that resource from them. It's a great document, and I'll talk about it in the next module in particular. We've also got someone from GDCI talking about what they do and things like that if you want more information on that aspect of them. We're not at all affiliated with them or paid by them to do this marketing for them. We just think that they do good stuff, and you should be aware of them. So by all means, give that a look. If you've got your own resources that you want to share, every now and then we get participants that say, oh, actually, we do wayfinding a little bit differently and we develop this specific guidelines for our wayfinding. By all means, feel free to share it. All participants can then access that. We just encourage that collaboration there. But under the Module 1 banner, you'll see a few things. You'll see the presentation, which is all the slides that we went through today. We'll see this link, which is VR 360-degree video module 1. And I'm just going to click on this one here. And it will take me to another link, which will take me to a YouTube site. And, oh no, I was going to say it'll take me to an ad, but it didn't. And this is a 360-degree video. So it works the same way as if you were on Google Street View or something like that. You kind of click the mouse and you can drag it around and you can have a look at everything that's going on around you. You can have a look at the birds in the sky and things like that. And this is Ken and I having a good chat, and you can see Ken's got his mustache there, so that's definitely the principal engineer. And we basically provide an example of what it feels like riding a shared path where it crosses, raised crossing facility, and then also at an at-grade facility. So you can get that perspective. Just in case you've never ridden in these types of facilities, we want to make sure that you feel comfortable understanding what that perspective feels like. So it's the next best thing to getting onto the saddle is doing this type of 360-degree learning. So give that a go. We've given you time at the end of today's module, so you can watch that one. It's only 4 minutes long. And you can also complete the quiz. So under the tasks, you've got module 1 quiz. All you need to do is, I've already got people that have attempted it, which is impressive. I'm going to switch my role to students so that I'll see what you see. And you just click on attempt quiz, and it's going to take you to all of the questions that you need to answer. By all means, flick through the slides to make sure that you understand everything clearly, and then hit submit. You'll get an instant mark. And if you're not sure of any of the answers, please reach out. But we've left some time at the end of today's session to complete that coursework. Yeah, that was it from me. Anything, Marissa, that I missed?
No, I think you've covered everything. Once again, if you have any issues logging onto the learning management system, a couple of you have already reached out, so thank you. Yeah, just please let me know and I can fix up your access there. Any remaining questions, Catherine?
No, we're all good. No, it's a great session. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thanks for the engagement, everyone. It's lovely to see those chat boxes filling up, and look forward to getting stuck into module 2 on Thursday, where we'll be chatting about on-road facilities and what we can do within that space.
Fantastic.
Great. Thanks very much. And thanks, Max. And thanks,
No
Catherine.
worries. So, yep,
Thank
smash out the
you.
quiz now, and then you can come with any questions in Thursday's module and smash out the video now. Have a lovely day, and yeah, we'll see you on Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
Thursday.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.